We shall now carry on with portfolio theory. It is the theory that holds that assets should be chosen on the basis of how they interact with one another rather than how they perform in isolation. An optimal combination would secure for the investor the highest possible return for a given level of risk, or the least possible risk for a given level of return. This is exactly what Markovich mentioned in his theory. The highest possible return for a given level of risk, or the least possible risk for a given level of return. Rational investors invest only on the efficient portfolio. If you see the slides in the next slide, this is where rational investors would invest in, the shaded area. Investors can construct portfolios anywhere in this shaded area by holding different combinations of available risky assets. The key term here is risky assets. There are no risk-free assets available. If risk-free assets are available, investors will combine them with the market portfolio. The market portfolio is all of this, the shaded area. Rational investors then therefore select their optimal portfolio on the capital market line at the point of tangency with their utility curves. I will explain to you later on this point. The cornerstone of Markovich theory is the ability of investors to diversify away unsystematic risks by holding portfolios consisting of a number of different shares, or even a number of different assets. Portfolio theory attempts to maximize return for a given level of risk. They contend that the risk of any particular stock should be evaluated by looking at how that stock's prices correlates to variation in the market portfolio made up of all assets in the market, each held proportionally to the value in the market. Using this theory, an investor seeks to uncover how if an asset interacts with others rather than how it performs individually. This is exactly what was mentioned in this explanation. So basically, the content of Markovich theory is to be able to diversify away unsystematic risks, which can be diversified away. As you know, systematic risks, no matter what you do, will never be able to be diversified away. In the next slide, Markovich's starting point was to construct what is known as the envelope curve. This would represent the set of portfolio choices available to the investor when investing in different combinations of risky assets. Again, I have to mention, Markovich only used risky assets in his portfolio. The risky assets are in this shaded area here. anything within the shaded area will be considered the risky assets. Investors can construct portfolios anywhere in this shaded area by holding different combinations of available risky assets. Moving down, while investors are able to locate themselves anywhere within the envelope curve, rational investors will invest only in those portfolios on the efficient frontier, represented by the arc BE. You notice the darkened line BE is known as the efficient portfolio. Called efficient portfolio because all portfolios in this arc are superior than all other portfolios within the envelope curve, giving either the maximum return for a given level of risk or minimum risk for a given level of return. Anywhere on the darkened line, the arc BE, these portfolios are far superior than any other portfolio inside the envelope curve. Using the maximum return for a given level of risk or the minimum return for a given level of return. If you notice, any portfolio that is located on the arc BE are far superior than that inside the curve. That is the crunch of Markovitch portfolio theory. Please read the textbook for further details and understanding. Moving down the slide. However, Markovitch had a problem because he did not include risk-free assets in the portfolio. If you notice the next slide, number 1, investors' choice are not restricted solely on risky assets. Markovitch, when he plotted the arc, he only considered risky assets. Risky assets are shares, bonds, mutual funds. But he did not consider risk-free assets. Tobin in 1958 recognized this. And number 2, by assuming investors can both lend and borrow at the risk-free rate, he managed to construct a capital market line known as CML RF to Z. This is the line that he's managed to construct, RF to Z, RF to Z. It is a straight line that lies tangent to the efficient frontier. Number 3, estimate the risk-free rate using government treasury bills. Draw a line tangent with the efficient frontier with point M, known as market portfolio. Point M is the market portfolio. Market portfolio represents only risky assets. Notice here, market portfolio represents optimal combination of risky assets given the existence of risk-free assets. Now, with this line in place, investors can move along RF, M, and Z by changing proportions of risk-free assets and market portfolio. Investors will always choose portfolio of CML, RFMZ because CML portfolios are more efficient compared to the efficient frontier. The CML portfolio chosen depends on the investor risk preference. You will notice I would rather be placed on the RFMZ, the CML line, where my cursor is, compared to down here on the efficient frontier, because for a given level of risk, I get a higher return for my investment. Next slide. What if no risk-free assets are available? If no risk-free assets are available, investors can only be at point M. Meaning to say, if no risk-free assets represented by R, F, M, and Z is available, investors can only lie at point N on the efficient frontier. But if risk-free assets are available, I would rather not be at point M, but higher at point M, where my cursor is, because I get a better return for the same level of risk. This slide shows you when risk-free assets available. You notice that investors now have a better option whether to lie on the efficient frontier represented by BE or whether to lie on the capital market line. This point, the theory that holds that assets should be chosen on the basis of how they interact with one another rather than how they perform in isolation. This is again repeated. And moving on, portfolio theory is used by many institutional investors, mutual funds, insurance companies, pension funds. Right? It is to date used in the market. But there are problems with using portfolio theory. First thing is whether you can borrow at risk-free rate. In the real world, it is unrealistic to borrow at risk-free rate. It is also very difficult to identify the market portfolio. I explain here, it requires knowledge of risk and return of all risky assets and their correlations. Remember, under Markowitz theory, anything in the arc are risky assets. It's so difficult to individually calculate the portfolio returns as well as their standard deviation along with their correlations. It is also very difficult to construct the market portfolio. And what if there are changing composition of the market portfolio? There also is a possibility that are shifts in the RF. RF, as per the assignment, you will notice that the risk-free rate changes depending on Bank Negara. We will conclude this session for now. The next session we will be doing capital asset pricing model.